Hello everyone, and welcome to the first installment of Myopia Nights. We are excited to bring the eye care industry this event, where we will be focusing on all things myopia. Myopia Nights will be a monthly event which will be conducted in different formats and will include local and international speakers. We are also planning for in-person events in the near future, which should be quite a lot of fun. We have been talking to many of the leaders in myopia, and when you surround yourself with myopia experts, it almost feels that everyone is doing myopia management. But we realized this is far from reality, and in actual fact, there's only a handful of optometrists who is doing myopia management in their practice. So after a few requests from optoms, we wanted to do our bit to spread the message, and together with companies like Cooper Vision and Hoya, we will bring you the knowledge, practical tips, tools, as well as the latest research to get you started with your myopia practice or help you improve your existing practice. With all the research that is coming out on myopia lately, our responsibility as eye care practitioners has really gone up a notch. And just correcting refractive error is not good enough anymore. With what we know now, educating parents or attempting to slow down the progression of myopia should become our first response when encountering myopia in children. So for our first session, we will be giving you an overview of myopia, the causes, the consequences, as well as treatment options. It's also important for us to learn more about what you want to hear during these sessions. So we will be running some live polls during the sessions to get your feedback. We will also be taking questions at the end of the session, so you can submit your questions on the activities icon on the bottom right of your screen. We will also be sending a very useful resource which you can print out and use as a reference guide at the end of the session. Right, so tonight, giving you a crash course, we have BV and myopia specialist, as well as the founder of Eyeli, Ilse Homan. Enjoy.
Thank you, Frantra, and hi, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of Myopia Nights. Tonight, we're going to talk about myopia management and what all the fuss is about. Myopia presents one of the biggest threats to eye health in the 21st century, with the incidence of myopia increasing at an alarming rate around the world. In 2020, it was already estimated that myopia affected about 30% of the global population. And this is projected to increase to 50% in 2050 if nothing is done. That's half the world's population myopic. And now, apart from all the obvious discomforts that comes with high myopia or blurry vision, having to find that first pair of glasses in the morning so you can find all the other pairs of glasses, having to wear glasses or even contact lenses. Myopia is also characterized by an excessive eye elongation, and it's this stretching of the eye that puts us at greater risk of developing sight-threatening conditions like myopia maculopathy, retinal detachment, post-subcapsular cataracts, and glaucoma. Pathologic myopia affects 50 to 70% of people with high myopia, and this risk increases with age and degree of myopia. If we have a look at this table, the increased risk of developing one of these conditions by the time that we're 60-year-old is 14 times higher if we're a myope that has between a minus of 50 and a minus 3 diopter of myopia. 3 times higher for retinal detachment, and twice as high for cataract and glaucoma, if we're somewhere between minus 0.50 and minus 3. When we go to high myopia, if we're higher than or more myopic than a minus 6, this odds just becomes really scary. And it's for that reason where it's really important to know that every diopter of myopia and every millimeter of actual length progression matters. Why is this happening? In the past, myopia was believed to be mostly genetic. But if we have a look at data collected over the last century, genetics alone cannot account for this massive increase in prevalence. If we have a look at this graph, it shows us the prevalence of myopia in 20-year-old Asians, and it dates back all the way to 1940, where the incidence of myopia was somewhere below 10% to below 40%. And how this has actually increased through the years to a point where some populations are almost 100% myopic. And this was in 2010. That's already 12 years ago. So what is happening? Why is this happening? While genetics are definitely still a factor, signs are also now pointing to additional environmental factors like less time spent outdoors and more time doing work. And to really understand how these environmental factors can play a role in the myopia development, let's start by having a look at what is supposed to be happening with normal refractive development or emmetropization. By now we know that most babies are born hyperopic, focus points behind the back of the eye. And evidence suggests that visual feedback actually helps to regulate the emmetropization process. So the eye can detect whether the focus point's behind the back of the eye or somewhere in front of the back of the eye, and then adjust the actual length accordingly until we're emmetropic. But then what happens beyond this point? Why would an eye elongate past emmetropia and actually become myopic? The latest research suggests that these three factors might be the strongest contenders for myopia development and for progression. It's form deprivation, lack of natural light, and peripheral refraction. So if we can understand how these factors contribute to myopia, not only can we help better prevent myopia in future, but it will also help us to understand which myopia management solution to prescribe at the moment if we have a person that is myopic and it's progressive. So let's have a look at what the science is saying about form deprivation. It was Schaffel et al. Who first proposed the role of visual feedback on refractive development. These research on animal models found that the moment you deprive an eye of forms and patterns to interpret, for instance, if we're putting a diffuser in front of an eye, and there's no visual feedback, this emmetropization system becomes an open loop system. So if the eye cannot determine whether it is myopic or hyperopic, it's going to continue elongating in an unregulated manner, causing higher and higher myopia. But how could this affect us in everyday life? Because we're not all walking around with diffusers. The natural world has a much higher spatial frequency than indoor and even some of the newer urban outdoor environments. And it was Flitcroft who suggested that these retinal images formed by man-made environments are starting to look very similar to those created by using diffusers in the form deprivation studies. To prove this point, he compared some pictures. So in the top picture, we can see this is an outdoor environment, a natural environment with lots of trees and leaves and detail, compared to a man-made indoor environment. He measured the spatial frequency in each of these pictures in cycles per degree, and the results clearly show that there's less spatial frequency in a man-made environment as opposed to natural environment. I also looked at a few extra examples to further illustrate this point, and I think it's easy to see how something like this could be not very useful to a retina, as opposed to a scenery like this, where there's lots more detail and and textures and patterns. Because remember, the more detail, patterns, textures, the more clues the retina has to help determine whether the defocus is myopic or hyperopic to help guide this emmetropization process. We should probably also rethink this new minimalistic design concept, which I happen to really like, or did. And don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting we should rethink it all the way back to the 80s. But maybe if we are making some suggestions for parents, we should just make them aware of something like this, especially if they have children that are prone to become myopic or progress in myopia. What are the considerations that we can take away from form deprivation myopia when we look at myopia management? It is important to have a retinal image that is rich in form and spatial frequency. We should really try and avoid optical solutions that can degrade retinal images, as even mild degrees of image degradation can produce form deprivation myopia. What about light? What does the science tell us about intensity and wavelength? Evidence suggests that low light may contribute to form deprivation myopia, as we've just discussed. But bright light also seems to promote retinal dopamine release. And not to go into too much detail, but dopamine seems to be the neurotransmitter responsible for guiding emmetropization. And when it comes to wavelength, it was found that different wavelengths also seem to help regulate refractive development. And this is really interesting. It's almost in the same way as we use the duochrome test at the end of our refraction to help us determine whether the focus point is on the back of the eye or a little bit in front or a little bit behind. Red light also seems to improve choroidal blood perfusion. And not to go into too much detail again, but choroidal thickness also seems to play a very important role in refractive development. How can this affect our everyday life situations? Outdoor light has an intensity that is 10 to 1,000 times higher than indoor lighting. It contains all the colors of the rainbow, even wavelengths that we cannot see, like infrared or ultraviolet. I found some really nice pictures to help us illustrate the difference between natural and artificial light. And as we can see with natural daylight, a nice wide spectrum of wavelength and a nice high intensity. The closest artificial light to natural daylight is incandescent light. It's just a pity that that's the light that we are all starting to phase out because it's not as energy efficient. When we look at LED, you can see that it's got a much narrower, much lower spectrum of wavelength, and intensities. But at least it's still a lot better than fluorescent light. And I think it's really important to make our patients aware of that. So what are the considerations to take away for myopia management when it comes to light? Unfortunately, the exact light recipe, that perfect ratio of illuminance and wavelength is not clear yet. There is a company called DopaVision that is working on a digitalized light-based myopia treatment. That is very exciting. They're busy with their trial at the moment, and I, for one, was very excited to see the results of that trial. But for now, the best that we can do is to encourage more time spent outdoors. There really is no proven substitute for that at the moment. The next culprit is a big one. The majority of research on peripheral hyperopic defocus was done by Earl Smith, who found that having a clear image on the central retina is not enough to ensure normal emmetropization. and that peripheral hyperopia can promote central actual myopia, regardless of whether the central focus point is on, behind, or even in front of the back. And the peripheral hyperopic defocus can be caused by the shape of the eye and accommodation error. So let's start with shape of the eye. For this example, let's assume that we are looking at an object that is far away, and that all the other objects in our field of view is equally far away, and therefore accommodation is completely relaxed. Animal studies suggest that even if we have a perfect center focus point that is on the back of the eye, that light entering from different angles can still fall behind the back of the eye because of the shape of the eye that is not perfectly spherical and lead to peripheral hyperopic defocus. This is even more apparent if we have an eye that is longer, an elongated eye. We can see that now the focus point is even further behind the back of the eye, causing hyperopic defocus. And this could be the reason why higher myopes with already elongated eyes progress so much faster. When it comes to accommodation error, it's important to understand that all objects in our field of view is not always going to be equally far away from our eyes. We live in a 3D world with lots of objects at lots of different distances. And therefore, our accommodation is also going to vary, depending on which of those objects we are focusing on. And everything else that is not at exactly the same distance as that object that we are looking at is then going to pass through the eye at an accommodation error. If we want to imagine what a hyperopic defocus map of a visual scene would look like, we'd have to take that visual scene, convert that into a dioptric map, convert that into an accommodation error map based on which object we are looking at, and that could then be converted into a defocus map. And luckily, Ian Flitcroft did exactly that. So to make a very long story short, we actually had a look at a couple of different scenarios. If we're looking, for instance, on a piece of paper on a desk that is close by, we can measure exactly where the focus point is and the amount of diopters. We can see the accommodative error of everything else that is going to be either closer or further away, which can then be converted into a defocus map. And in this case, everything in red is going to create hyperopic defocus on the retina, and everything in blue is going to cause myopic defocus on the retina. So when we're looking at a piece of paper on a desk, we can see that things are a little bit closer to us is going to cause hyperopic defocus in the inferior field, which is then going to cause hyperopic defocus in the superior retina. When we look at a screen that's a little bit further away, we normally have a keyboard that's a little bit closer, and this is what that'll look like. A lot more hyperopic defocus in the inferior field, which is going to cause hyperopic defocus in the superior retina. The next one was a little bit scary. You know how we've always been telling our patients to every 20 minutes look up at something at least 20 feet away for 20 minutes? Well, according to this, that might not be the best idea if the patient's not actually going to get up from the desk. Because if we fixate further away, accommodation is going to be more relaxed, and there's going to be a lot more hyperopic defocus in the inferior field that is going to cause hyperopic defocus in the superior retina. The least amount of peripheral hyperopic defocus is created when we're looking at a scene where everything is far away. Still a little bit, but remember the glass is a little bit closer. But everything is far away. What are the implications of peripheral refraction in everyday life? Well, Smith's research suggests that if there's conflicting feedback between the fovea and the peripheral retina, that the direction of actual length growth is going to be dominated by the peripheral retina, even if the central focus point is on the fovea. So even though foveal focus is obviously more important for clear vision, his theory is that there's just so much more peripheral retina as opposed to fovea. And that if we could, say, tally up all the votes coming from the central retina and all the votes coming from the peripheral retina, the peripheral retina is always going to win in the end because there's just so much more of it. So what are the considerations for myopia management? Peripheral hyperopic defocus can cause myopia, even if the central focus point is emmetropic, or myopic, or hyperopic. Peripheral hyperopic refraction is higher when we do. It is important to know that research in myopia is still developing. It's still ongoing. But in the words of the great Brian Holden, we don't know everything about myopia, but we know too much to sit back and do nothing. This was said in 2015, and it is even more true today, because now we have evidence-based treatments that have shown to be very effective in slowing down the progression of myopia. So let's have a look at some of the myopia management solutions that we can suggest to our patients at the moment. When it comes to lifestyle, we could encourage more time spent outdoors, try and limit continuous near work, 20-20-20 rule, in this case, just now tell the patient to please get up from the desk and stare into the abyss as far as possible, and ensure good lighting. When it comes to vision, we should please stop undercorrecting. It is not working. If anything, some of the research are showing that it actually increases myopia progression. And lastly, binocular vision. The exact link between BV and myopia development is still unclear. But it is always important to optimize binocular vision to provide a single clear image on the back of the eye. If we want to go a little bit further, we can suggest optical or pharmaceutical solutions. And just by quick glance, it's interesting to see how the newer generation simultaneous defocus lenses that are actually aimed at reducing peripheral hyperopic defocus seems to have a much higher efficacy than some of our traditional myopia management solutions. So when we look at efficacy, what does this mean? So for this lens, and I always start with this lens because it's top left, the subjects in the treatment zone, the treatment group, the ones that actually received the Benz lens, had a 52% less myopic progression than the subjects in the control group, and a 62% less progression in actual length than the subjects in the control group, who in this case were wearing a normal single vision lens. Now, it's always nice to compare all the different efficacies, but unfortunately, when it comes to full-term studies, we can't really compare to the pharmaceutical solutions, because the best evidence-based pharmaceutical trial that we have available is the LAMP study for low-dose atropine. And in this particular study, after the first year, they converted the control group to also start using atropine. So as of year 2, they didn't have a control group to compare efficacy of the drug to. But luckily, what we could get was the results from the 1 year, the first year of the trial. So let's unpack that. It's a very well-known phenomenon that the best efficacy for any treatment solution is achieved in the first year. We can see that by, again, looking at our DIMS lens, where we have SE 69 and AL 66 for year 1, compared to 52 and 62 for year 2. But this will be the same across all treatment solutions, and like I said, is very normal. But it's important to understand if we want to compare apples to apples. And the nice thing about this slide, it doesn't contain, we don't have the first year results for all the solutions. But most of the solutions on this slide is also currently available in South Africa or coming soon. So let's have a look. Simultaneous defocus lenses also seem to have a higher efficacy than the traditional peripheral defocus lens. And one of the reasons for that is the fact that with the traditional peripheral defocus, we have an asymmetric design. So if we look in the center of the lens, that is our distance correction. And as we move out anywhere into the periphery, we go into the zone where it gets more and more and more plus. Now, the treatment zone, the plus part of this lens, is very far into the periphery. Where some of the newer research have shown that it's actually better to have the treatment zone a little bit closer to the center. But apart from that, if we're not exactly in the center of the lens, we kind of lose that whole peripheral defocus efficacy. So not as effective as we move further and further away from the center. But the third thing as well is, if we're constantly moving our eye around, we're also going into zones that are not as clear. It's almost undercorrecting for the distance, as compared to the newer generation simultaneous defocus lenses, where the whole lens is the single vision distance correction, and we have multiple little zones, little lenslets of high plus that is inducing that myopic defocus onto the peripheral retina, a little bit closer to the center of the eye. And even if we move away from the center, we'll always be in a zone where we have clear distance vision and close by areas of treatment zone. The same does not completely apply to our contact lens optical solutions, because remember, with a contact lens, the lens stays on the eye. So even if the eye is moving, the treatment zones and everything is moving with the eye. But interestingly enough, simultaneous defocus, where we have, again, those definite treatment zones, have a better efficacy than an asymmetric design, as we can see here. And now that we have apples that we can compare with apples, we can have a look at the pharmaceutical efficacies. And when we start looking at these lenses compared to the highest concentration of atropine, which was 0.05, we can see that the spherical equivalent, very similar efficacy, if anything a little bit higher, but a much higher efficacy when it comes to actual length progression as opposed to atrophy. And this obviously decreases as we go lower and lower in dose with atrophy. So if we take an evidence-based approach, which I always recommend, if you're not in a position to be prescribing atropine, I think it's safe to say that you're not really missing out on that much. There's no reason why you cannot prescribe a different optical solution, which seem to have a much better efficacy anyway. And one of the reasons why we decided that this first event is not going to be CPD is a lot of optometrists have been asking us, which are these solutions that are currently available in South Africa? If we find out that someone is a myopia progression suspect, what do we do? And tonight we're going to name them. So this first lens is available in South Africa and is Hoya's Smile Smart. The second lens is Stellist from Essilor. It is not available in South Africa, and at this moment, we're not completely sure if it is ever going to come into South Africa. And this lens is Zeiss's Myo Vision. In the contact lenses, the first lens, simultaneously focused lens, is Vision's MySight. And I'm so excited. I got confirmation this morning that I'm allowed to tell you guys this. This lens is finally coming to South Africa. Looks like next month. So somewhere in November. And we are all very excited about that. This lens is also by Vision, and it is the Biofinity multifocal distance center lens, orthokeratology, and obviously pharmaceuticals. The best interventions today may not be the best interventions tomorrow. That is true. But it is still the very best that we can offer our myopic patients today. And research have shown great efficacy already. And we have to remember that every diopter matters. Thank you.
Great. Awesome, Ilse. That was amazing. Thank you. Actually, from the polls, it seems that there's quite a few people who's actually actively prescribing myopia management solutions, which is great to see.
Nice.
And there is 2 questions that's popped up. I think that we've got time for 2. The first one is, which metric is the most important to track? Is it the prescription or is it the actual length?
That is a tough one. So it used to be prescription, and then about 3 months ago, everybody was talking about the actual length, because actual length is actually what is going to cause that elongation. But there was a very interesting talk by Ian Flitcroft at the IMC, which we attended this year, that actually said that we should be looking at both. So I feel like I want to say both. Actual length is very, very important. But that said, if we don't have an actual length biometer, it doesn't mean that you can't, first do a really good in myopia management, and second, that you are missing a lot of the information. I will later in, probably not this year, later next year, talk a little bit more about that. So that's a very interesting question that I feel is going to have a much better answer if I present something in the new year.
Okay.
But that's
actually
good.
One of the polls was which tools do you use to help and track myopia, and no one is using a biometer. I think there's only one person in South Africa currently that's using a biometer. But I know there's estimators out there which can go far away that is quite accurate and can help you track the actual length without having to buy a biometer. The other question is also related to the same, and it is, does it mean that if the prescription is changing, that the actual length is also changing of the eye?
That's also a very interesting question and relates back to that same paper that I feel I actually should have included, but it's not officially published yet. So this is very interesting. You have to remember that there's corneal refraction and then there is actual refraction. And by far the most myopes are actual myopes, but you could actually also see that as the eye stretches, it actually changes the curvature of the cornea as well, which then also becomes steeper and becomes more myopic. So also a very good answer. I can give you a quick glimpse. In Flipkart actually tested because they also have a myopia calculator and a actual length measurement and a actual length estimator. And this paper was really interesting because we would think that there would be a set proportion between how much would be on the cornea and how much would be on the actual length. And the short answer was it's not always that straightforward. We have to remember that the refraction of the lens can also change. The whole eye is stretching, so the cornea can also change. So it was very interesting. And the lead takeaway from that was it is actually important to be able to know both, if possible. But it's not to say that you can't do myopia management if you don't have a biometer or can do an actual length measurement.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. There's no more if anyone's got any questions, then please submit them. You can also just submit them in the comment section. And then, yeah, we'll give it a couple of more minutes for any more questions, and then we'll wrap it up.
Oh,
Right.
did you see that?
Saw a message.
Okay, so yeah, Cooper Vision has just let us know that their trials are on their way. So yeah, we're getting my site next month. That is very exciting. I'm very excited.
So one more question is, will there be fitting tutorials as part of the series for my site lenses?
That's okay.
Actually, yeah, that's a great
that's
idea.
A very good question.
So
I
yeah,
hope we'll have an answer for you very, very soon.
I mean, that's great to have feedback like that, and I mean to perhaps do practical sessions like that would form part of the series for sure. So Cooper Vision can definitely help us with that.
So remember, guys, this is about you. We want to know what it is that you want to know. We've had quite a few people requesting that we do these kinds of binocular. There's a couple of people that ask about binocular as well. So you guys need to tell us what it is that you want us to talk about. And also, if you prefer to have this online or in-person events. But we'll send polls out where we can ask you guys that, and we can see what the majority wants.
I see Diane Hater has raised her hand. Diane, if you've got any question that you want to ask?
Yeah, what is the major difference between the Energize and the MySight?
I think that's a good question for Cooper Vision.
Yeah.
Yeah, so hi, this is Jeanette here from Cooper Vision. So,
hi, Jeanette.
I suppose it's Wayne that answered asked the question. So I think I'm going to send you some theory behind it to just explain it better. But basically, with images, it's more like a little bit of plus incorporated in the middle of the lens, which is equivalent to about 050, 075, to just ease the stress of the accommodative system. Whereas, as Ilse really explained well just now, if you look at my site, it is a myopic defocus. So the lens basically has a dual purpose. It's got 2 treatment zones and 2 correction zones. So on the one hand, it corrects the myopia, and on the other hand, it places the image shell in front of the retina to correct or treat, not correct, treat the myopia. So totally different design. And then obviously the one is a 1 day and the one is a monthly product. But I will make sure to share some details with you via email as well to just maybe make it more clear.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeanette. Thanks that you popped in there. That's epic.
I'm not going to put on my camera because I am hiding in my bedroom from my children. So that's not going to work.
No, that sounds very familiar. Don't worry. So another thing that I can add is the moment we want to push that myopic defocus into the periphery, we really got to work with a lot more plus than that. So we're looking at least about a +2, whereas as Jeanette said, the other one is basically more like a asymmetric design that we were discussed. The difference between the asymmetric design in the spectacle lens as opposed to the simultaneous defocus lens in the spectacle lenses as well. So I think the biggest difference is the fact that we don't want gradual, we want distinct, zones, treatment zones, clear zones. And then we also want to have a lot more plus. I'm talking at least about a +2 to 50 in the peripheral field, as opposed to just a little bit. I hope that answers your questions, but if you need to have a lot more information on the contact lenses, I'm sure Jeanette's going to send that to you.
Awesome. Great. I think we're coming up on 45 minutes. We can perhaps have time for one more question, and then we'll say goodbye.
Okay. Okay. You're better at reading. This is coming up very close.
Yes, one more question, Ilse. Something I've wondered about. I have good results with my site. What about progressive lenses? Will there be asymmetric axial elongation, less superiorly but more inferiorly?
Okay, are we talking about multifocal spectacle lenses?
I assume so.
Yes. Okay, so that's a very interesting question, and there's actually a paper on that by David Bernstein. And yes, it is true. So the moment we look at even the executive bifocal or any multifocal, because it's a lot of plus at the bottom, it actually it actually deposes myopic defocus in the superior retina. That is also why we find that the executive, if we look at the efficacy studies, we'll find that the executive bifocal is doing a little bit better than the multifocal because it's a lot bigger area that actually superimposes that myopic defocus into the superior retina. The only problem is that Smith actually did directional studies and found that the greatest efficacy, if we want to push myopic defocus into the periphery, is along the horizontal, okay? So horizontal plane. So it helps a little bit in the superior, but we really want to have, if we could only have one zone working really well, it would have been better if it was along the horizontal or at midline. So it will work better than nothing, but the peripheral, the simultaneous defocus lenses at this stage would be more efficient.
Okay. Awesome. Right. Well, thank you, guys. That's I think that's it. That's amazing to see the showing for the first event. We're excited for the next events. We want to make it interactive and fun. But yeah, we are really stoked with the first meeting. So thanks for everyone for joining, and please look out for an email with a survey and as well as a very nice resource which you can print out, put on your desk, and quickly use as a reference guide. So we'll see you guys next time.
Have a great night,
Thanks,
everyone.
Rachel. Thanks, Lisa. Bye.
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 Thank you. Bye.
Bye.